Elena Voss never imagined her wedding day would feel like a funeral. Standing at the altar in a dress that cost more than her father's debt, she watched Viktor Karev, the man who bought her future with a single signature, slide a platinum band onto her trembling finger. No vows of love, no promises of forever, just the cold weight of obligation and the silent understanding that she had traded her life to save her father's. This is a story about a woman who became invisible in her own marriage, and the ruthless man who almost lost everything before he learned to see her. If you're captivated by stories of transformation, redemption, and unexpected love, stay until the end, and please, hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far Elena's journey travels across the world. The morning Elena's life changed forever started like any other Tuesday. She knelt in the botanical garden greenhouse, her camera lens focused on a rare ghost orchid that had finally bloomed after 3 years of careful cultivation. The translucent petals seemed to glow in the early light filtering through the glass panels above, each delicate curve a masterpiece of nature's patience. "Breathtaking," Elena whispered, adjusting her aperture to capture the way morning dew clung to the flower's ethereal white throat. This was her sanctuary, this world of silent growth, of beauty that asked nothing of her except attention and care. Her phone buzzed in her jacket pocket. She ignored it, taking 3 more shots from different angles. The orchid wouldn't wait. By afternoon, the perfect light would be gone, and with it, this particular magic. The phone buzzed again. Then again. With a sigh, Elena set down her camera and pulled out her phone. 8 missed calls, all from her mother. Ice flooded her veins. Her mother never called during work hours. Not unless... Elena's hand shook as she pressed the callback button. Her mother answered before the first ring finished. "Elena." Her mother's voice was barely a whisper, thick with tears. "You need to come home. Now. It's your father." "What happened? Is he hurt? Mom, talk to me." "Just come home, mija, please. He needs you." The line went dead. Elena grabbed her camera bag with fumbling hands, her mind racing through terrible possibilities. An accident. A heart attack. Her father was only 56, but he worked too hard, slept too little, carried too much stress from his struggling business. She made the 20-minute drive in 12, her old Honda rattling in protest as she pushed it beyond its usual limits. The small house she'd grown up in looked exactly the same as always, modest, well-kept, the garden her mother tended with religious devotion blooming with late summer roses. But the black sedan parked in the driveway was wrong, expensive, threatening in its polished perfection. Elena's mother met her at the door, mascara tracked down her cheeks in dark rivers. "He's in his office. With them." "With who?" Her mother just shook her head, pressing a wadded tissue to her mouth as fresh sobs racked her shoulders. Elena moved past her, down the familiar hallway lined with family photos. Her quinceañera, her college graduation, her parents' wedding day. The door to her father's home office stood ajar. Inside, her father sat behind his desk, his face ashen, staring at a stack of papers as if they contained his death sentence. Across from him sat 2 men in expensive suits. But it was the third man who drew Elena's attention like a lodestone. He stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, watching the street with the stillness of a predator. Tall, broad-shouldered, probably in his mid-30s. Dark hair swept back from a face too angular to be classically handsome, all hard planes and sharp edges, except for his mouth, which was surprisingly full. He wore his tailored suit like armor, and even in profile, Elena could sense the power radiating from him like heat. "Papa?" Elena's voice came out smaller than she intended. Her father's head snapped up, and the raw fear in his eyes made her stomach plummet. "Elena, no, you shouldn't." "Mr. Voss," one of the suited men interrupted smoothly. "I believe we've discussed this. Your daughter stays." The man at the window turned. Elena had seen dangerous men before. This was Los Angeles, after all, and she'd done photography work in neighborhoods where she'd learned to trust her instincts about which streets to avoid after dark. But she'd never encountered anyone who radiated menace quite like this. His eyes were the color of smoke after a fire, gray and cold and assessing. They swept over her in a single comprehensive glance that felt like being cataloged and filed away. "This is your daughter." It wasn't a question. His voice was deep, textured like gravel wrapped in velvet. "Yes." Her father stood on unsteady legs. Elena, this is Victor Karev. He's... I know who he is, Elena heard herself say, though her mouth had gone dry. Everyone in Los Angeles knew the name Victor Karev, the business magnate who'd built an empire from nothing, the philanthropist who donated millions to children's hospitals and arts programs, the man the newspapers photographed at gallery openings and charity galas, always with a different, beautiful woman on his arm. And if you believed the whispers, the ghost stories people told in certain circles, the crime lord who controlled half the city's underground, who'd consolidated power through a combination of strategic brilliance and carefully applied violence. Then you understand the situation, Victor said, his eyes never leaving her face. I don't understand anything. Elena forced herself to meet his gaze, even as every instinct screamed at her to look away, to make herself small and unnoticeable. What's going on, Papa? Her father sank back into his chair, his face crumpling. I'm sorry, mija. I'm so sorry. I thought I could fix it. I thought the loan would save the business, that I'd be able to pay it back before... How much? Elena's question cut through his stammering apology. The silence that followed was suffocating. $3 million, one of the suited men finally answered, plus interest accumulated over 18 months. Total amount due? $4.2 million. The number was so absurd that Elena almost laughed. That's impossible. We don't have that kind of money. We've never had... Which is why we've come to a mutually beneficial arrangement, Victor said, moving away from the window with the fluid grace of someone utterly comfortable in his own body. He stopped beside her father's desk, close enough that Elena caught the scent of his cologne, something dark and expensive, cedar and smoke. What arrangement? Elena looked from Victor to her father, dread pooling in her stomach like ice water. Her father couldn't meet her eyes. Elena, I couldn't let them take everything. The house, the business, your mother's security. They offered a solution, and I... What? Arrangement. Victor pulled a document from his jacket pocket and placed it on the desk with precise care. A marriage contract. You will become my wife for a period of no less than 2 years. In exchange, your father's debt will be forgiven in full, and he will receive an additional sum sufficient to stabilize his business operations. For several heartbeats, Elena was certain she'd misheard him. The words didn't make sense strung together like that. Marriage contract, his wife, debt forgiven. You're joking, she whispered. I don't joke about business, Miss Voss. This isn't business. This is insane. This is... Elena's hands clenched into fists at her sides. You can't just buy a person. I'm not buying you. I'm offering a contractual agreement. You maintain complete autonomy over your person, your career, your daily life. The marriage is legal but limited in scope. You'll live in my home, attend certain social functions as my wife, and maintain the appearance of a legitimate marriage. In return, your family is protected and provided for. Elena stared at him, searching for any hint of humanity in those cold gray eyes. And if I refuse? Victor's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his gaze. There and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. Then your father has 3 days to produce $4.2 million, or I will seize all assets, including this house. The choice, Miss Voss, is yours. Elena, please. Her father's voice broke. I know what I'm asking is unforgivable. But your mother, if we lose the house, if I lose the business, we have nothing, we'll have nothing. Elena looked at her father, really looked at him. When had he gotten so old? When had his hair turned so gray, his shoulders grown so bowed? She thought of her mother sobbing in the hallway, of the modest home her parents had worked their entire lives to build, of the small gardening business her father had poured his soul into for 30 years, all of it about to be destroyed because of one desperate decision. How did this happen? She asked quietly. Her father's laugh was bitter. The same way it always happens. I was losing clients to bigger companies with better equipment. I took a loan from the wrong people to expand, to compete. Then the economy shifted, contracts fell through, and suddenly I couldn't make the payments. I tried to refinance, but... He gestured helplessly at the men in the room. Mr. Karev acquired my debt 6 months ago. And you've been negotiating this arrangement ever since. Elena said, the pieces falling into place. You've been planning to sell me for 6 months. Not sell, her father said desperately. Never that. This is temporary, mija. 2 years. Just 2 years and then you're free. And we're free. And you get what you want out of this arrangement? Elena directed the question at Victor, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. A wife you can parade around at your parties? There are plenty of women who would line up for that privilege without you having to coerce them. Those women want something from me, Victor said simply. You'll want nothing except your family's protection, which I'm already providing. That makes you useful. Useful. Elena tested the word, tasted its ugliness. What a romantic proposal. I'm not offering romance, Miss Voss. I'm offering a solution to a problem. Your family needs money. I need a wife who understands her place and won't develop inconvenient expectations about our arrangement. It's a clean transaction. Elena wanted to scream. She wanted to tell him to go to hell, to take his blood money and his cold transaction and choke on it. She wanted to grab her father by the shoulders and shake him, demand to know how he could even consider this madness. But she looked at her father's desperate eyes, heard her mother's broken sobs from the hallway, and felt the weight of 30 years of love and sacrifice pressing down on her shoulders. I need to think, she said. You have 10 minutes. Victor checked his watch with casual indifference. After that, the offer expires and we proceed with asset seizure. You bastard, Elena breathed. Undoubtedly. He moved back to the window, dismissing her as cleanly as if she'd already agreed and ceased to be interesting. Elena fled the office, brushing past her mother into the bathroom where she'd hidden as a child when the world became too much. She locked the door and gripped the edge of the sink, staring at her reflection in the mirror. 28 years old, graduate degree in botanical photography, a small but growing reputation in her field, enough that she could almost support herself on gallery sales and magazine assignments. She'd been planning to travel to Costa Rica next month to photograph rare orchids in the cloud forests. She'd been planning to finally ask out the cute botanist who worked at the university greenhouse. She'd been planning a life. And now a stranger with smoke-gray eyes was offering to trade her like a commodity, to install her in his house like a piece of furniture, to brand her with his name for the privilege of saving her family from ruin. 2 years, her father had said. Just 2 years. Elena closed her eyes and saw her mother's face, ravaged by tears. Saw the house she'd grown up in, every corner filled with memories of birthday parties and Christmas mornings and quiet Sunday dinners. Saw her father's dreams reduced to numbers on a page, everything he'd built about to be crushed under the heel of a man who probably wouldn't remember his name a month from now. She thought about love, about the vague future she'd imagined with a partner who would see her, value her, choose her freely. That dream felt impossibly far away now, a luxury she'd never realized she couldn't afford. Useful, Victor had called her. Not wanted, not valued, useful. Elena opened her eyes and stared at her reflection. The woman looking back at her seemed like a stranger, pale, shaken, trapped, but alive. Her family was alive. And if she walked away from this, if she chose her own freedom over their survival, they would be destroyed. She thought of her mother's roses, how they bloomed year after year because someone cared for them, how they didn't choose to be beautiful. They simply were, and beauty was its own justification. Maybe some sacrifices were like that. Not chosen, but necessary. Not wanted, but done anyway, because love demanded nothing less. Elena straightened, smoothed her hair, and walked back to the office with her spine rigid and her eyes dry. Victor turned from the window as she entered, his expression unreadable. I have conditions, Elena said, her voice steady despite the earthquake in her chest. Name them. I continue my photography career. I maintain my own bank account, my own finances. You don't touch my money, I don't touch yours. I attend your social functions as required, but my days are my own. And after 2 years, we divorce quietly. No contest, no complications. Agreed. I'm not finished. Elena forced herself to meet his eyes. This is a business arrangement. I'm not sleeping with you. We're not. Physical intimacy is not part of the contract, Victor said, and if he was offended by her bluntness, his face didn't show it. Separate bedrooms. You're free to conduct your personal life however you choose, as long as you're discreet. Elena wondered if she should feel relieved or insulted. She settled for numb. Fine. Then I agree. I'll be your useful wife for 2 years. After that, I never want to see you again. That can be arranged. Victor nodded to one of his associates, who produced the contract and placed it before her with a pen. Sign here, here, and here. Elena picked up the pen. It was heavy, expensive, probably worth more than her entire camera kit. Her hand trembled as she pressed it to paper. Elena, you don't have to, her father started. Yes, I do. She signed her name in 3 places, each stroke of the pen feeling like a small death. Because you couldn't fix this yourself, and Mom deserves better than losing everything because you gambled wrong. The words came out harsher than she intended, but she didn't take them back. Let her father carry that weight. She'd carry everything else. Victor signed after her, his signature bold and efficient. We'll marry Friday, 4 days. My assistant will contact you with details regarding the ceremony and your relocation to my residence. I suggest you use this time to put your affairs in order. Friday. Elena's laugh was hollow. Efficient. I don't see the point in waiting. Victor pocketed the contract. Your father's debt is now resolved. The transfer of funds to stabilize his business will occur within 24 hours. Gentlemen, we're done here. The 2 suited associates filed out. Victor paused at the door, looking back at Elena with those cold, assessing eyes. For what it's worth, Miss Voss, I don't take pleasure in coercion. But I need a wife who won't complicate my life, and you need your family protected. We'll both get what we require from this arrangement. I don't require anything from you except exactly what you promised, Elena said. Don't expect gratitude. I don't expect anything at all. He inclined his head, a gesture that might have been respect on a different man. Until Friday. Then he was gone, taking his smoke and cedar scent and his crushing presence with him, leaving Elena standing in her father's office with the ghost of her signature burning on the page. Her father stood, reaching for her. Elena, I'm so... Don't. She stepped back, away from his outstretched hands. Don't apologize. Don't try to make this better. Just, I need to go. She left without another word, walking past her mother, who called her name in a voice thick with tears. Elena climbed into her rattling Honda and drove, not back to her apartment, but to the botanical gardens where her ghost orchid still bloomed in its perfect temporary beauty. She sat on the greenhouse floor and cried until she had nothing left, until she was hollow and clean and ready to pack up the pieces of her life into boxes that would fit in a stranger's mansion. The orchid watched, silent and indifferent, beauty without judgment. The next 4 days passed in a blur of surreal activity. Victor's assistant, a terrifyingly efficient woman named Margaret with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing, contacted Elena within an hour of the contract signing. The wedding would take place at Victor's estate. Small ceremony, immediate family only, no press. A designer would arrive Tuesday morning to fit Elena for a dress. Movers would pack her apartment Thursday. Everything was arranged, decided, handled. Elena felt like a doll being posed and positioned, her input neither required nor particularly wanted. The designer brought 3 dresses, each more beautiful and more expensive than anything Elena had ever touched. She chose the simplest: ivory silk, clean lines, no embellishments. If she had to play this part, she'd do it on her terms, such as they were. Her mother tried to help her pack, dissolving into tears every 20 minutes until Elena gently but firmly sent her home. Her father didn't come at all. Elena was grateful for his absence. She didn't trust herself not to say something unforgivable if she had to look at him right now. She told her friend she was taking an extended assignment abroad, told her gallery representative the same, told the cute botanist she'd been meaning to ask out that she was sorry, but she'd be traveling for a while, and maybe when she got back. The lie tasted like ashes, but the truth was impossible to speak aloud. Thursday evening, Elena stood in her empty apartment and looked at the bare walls where her photographs had hung, the spaces on shelves where her books had lived, the absence of everything that had made this place hers. Tomorrow, she would become Mrs. Victor Karev. Tomorrow, her life as Elena Voss would end. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she drove to the ocean and watched the sun rise over the Pacific, trying to memorize the moment, the feeling of being utterly alone but still somehow free. By the time she drove to Victor's estate Friday afternoon, she'd cried herself dry. She felt distant from her own body, as if she were observing everything from somewhere far away. The estate sprawled across 5 acres in the Hollywood Hills, a modern masterpiece of glass and stone that probably cost more than her father's debt 10 times over. Security waved her through the gate without question. Margaret's efficiency again. Inside, the house was all cold elegance. High ceilings, marble floors, art that probably belonged in museums, beautiful and sterile as an operating room. Margaret met her in the foyer. "Miss Voss, your belongings have been placed in your suite. The ceremony begins in 1 hour. I'll show you to your room." Elena followed her up a sweeping staircase to the second floor, down a hallway lined with abstract paintings that probably cost more than Elena would earn in her lifetime. Margaret opened a door onto a bedroom suite larger than Elena's entire apartment had been. "Your suite," Margaret said simply. "Mr. Karev's rooms are in the east wing. You'll have complete privacy. The ceremony will take place in the garden. I'll return in 40 minutes to escort you down." "Thank you," Elena managed. Margaret paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Miss Voss, I've worked for Mr. Karev for 8 years. He's a difficult man, but he keeps his word. If he promised you protection and freedom, you'll have it." Then she was gone, leaving Elena alone in her beautiful cage. Elena walked through the suite in a daze. Bedroom with a king-size bed and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Bathroom with a tub large enough for 3 people. Walk-in closet already populated with clothes she hadn't chosen. Margaret's work again, no doubt. A small sitting room with a desk where she could work. Her camera equipment sat carefully unpacked on a shelf, and Elena felt a sharp stab of something like grief. At least they'd let her keep that. She showered in the oversized bathroom, dried her hair, slipped into the ivory silk dress, applied minimal makeup because her hand shook too badly for anything more complicated, fastened the delicate gold earrings her mother had pressed into her hands that morning with red-rimmed eyes, and whispered apologies. When Margaret knocked, Elena was ready, or as ready as she'd ever be. The garden was small, intimate, beautiful in the late afternoon light. White roses. Someone's idea of tradition, she supposed. A judge waited under an archway, flanked by 2 witnesses Elena didn't recognize. Her parents sat in the front row, her mother weeping silently into a handkerchief, her father looking a decade older than he had 4 days ago. And there was Victor, standing with his hands clasped behind his back, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Elena's car. He watched her approach with the same cold assessment he'd shown in her father's office, his expression utterly unreadable. Elena walked down the short aisle alone. No one gave her away. She was giving herself, trading herself, a transaction that required no ritual participation beyond her signature. She stopped beside Victor, and he turned to face her. Up close, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the slight scar cutting through his left eyebrow, the way his jaw was clenched tight enough to make the muscle jump. "Nervous?" she whispered, unable to help herself. "No." His voice was low, meant only for her. "Are you?" "Terrified. But I'm here anyway." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or respect. "That takes courage." "It takes desperation," Elena corrected. "Don't romanticize this." "I wouldn't dream of it." The judge began speaking, the familiar words of marriage ceremonies rendered strange and hollow by context. Elena barely heard them. She was too busy trying to reconcile the enormity of what was happening with the mundane details. The way late afternoon sun gilded the roses, the distant sound of traffic from the highway below, the weight of Victor's gaze on her face. "Do you, Elena Maria Voss, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Elena looked at Victor and saw nothing she recognized as human warmth, just cold necessity, the same expression he'd probably worn while signing 100 other contracts. "I do," she said clearly. "Do you, Victor Alexander Karev, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." His voice was steady, certain. Why wouldn't it be? He was getting exactly what he wanted, a convenient wife who knew her place. The judge smiled. "Then by the power vested in me by the state of California, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Victor hesitated for the first time since Elena had met him. She saw the question in his eyes and answered it with the barest nod. This was part of the performance, the appearance of legitimacy. He leaned in, and Elena closed her eyes. His lips brushed hers, light and brief and utterly impersonal. It was over before she could register anything except the faint smell of cedar and the warmth of his breath. When she opened her eyes, she was married, Mrs. Victor Karev. She'd never felt more alone in her life. Said, there was a dinner after, catered by people who moved through the house like elegant shadows. Elena sat beside her new husband at a table set for 6. The two of them, her parents, and Victor's 2 witnesses who turned out to be his lawyer and his head of security. The food was probably excellent. Elena tasted nothing. Victor played his part perfectly, the attentive groom. He placed a hand on the small of her back when they entered the dining room, pulled out her chair, poured her wine. Anyone watching would have seen a couple newly married, the groom solicitous, the bride quietly radiant. No one would have seen the truth, that his touch was as impersonal as a handshake, that she flinched every time he came near, that they existed in parallel universes that happened to occupy the same physical space. Elena, mija, her mother said at one point, reaching across the table to squeeze her daughter's hand. You look so beautiful. I'm so happy, Elena supplied when her mother's voice broke. Are you happy, Mama? Her mother's eyes filled with fresh tears. She didn't answer. Elena's father hadn't spoken since they'd sat down. He pushed food around his plate and avoided looking at his daughter directly. Good. Elena had nothing to say to him anyway. After dinner, her parents left quickly, her mother clinging to Elena in the foyer with desperate strength. 2 years, she whispered into Elena's hair. It's only 2 years, and then you can have your life back. You can... I know, Mama. Elena extracted herself gently but firmly. I know, go home. I'll be fine. It was a lie, but what else could she say? Victor stood at a distance, allowing the goodbye its pretense of privacy. When Elena's parents had finally driven through the gates, he turned to her with careful neutrality. I have work to attend to in my office. Margaret has prepared a schedule of upcoming social obligations that require our joint attendance. She'll review it with you tomorrow. Your days are otherwise your own, as promised. How generous, Elena said flatly. I keep my agreements, Mrs. Karev. The name felt like a slap. Don't call me that. It's your legal name now. Legally, maybe. But you don't own me, and I'd appreciate if you'd remember that. I've never suggested otherwise. Victor's expression remained maddeningly calm. Good night, Elena. I trust you'll find your suite comfortable. He walked away, disappearing into some distant wing of the enormous house, leaving Elena standing alone in the marble foyer of her new prison. She climbed the stairs to her beautiful room, closed the door, and locked it. Then she sat on the edge of the ridiculously large bed and stared at the platinum band on her finger that marked her as someone's wife. Outside her window, Los Angeles glittered in the darkness, 1,000,000 lives being lived by people who were free to choose their own futures. Elena wasn't one of them anymore. She'd traded her freedom for her family's survival, and the weight of that choice settled over her like a shroud, heavy and inescapable. This was her life now. Mrs. Victor Karev, useful, invisible, a wife in name only to a man who looked at her and saw nothing but a contract fulfilled. Elena lay down on top of the covers, still wearing her wedding dress, and watched the city lights blur through tears she'd thought she'd already cried dry. Somewhere in the house, Victor was working, probably already having forgotten about her. And Elena realized with crystalline clarity that this was how it would be for the next 2 years, living parallel lives in the same space, touching only when appearances demanded, existing in proximity without connection. She'd signed away 2 years of her life. She just hoped she'd still recognize herself when she got it back. The first month passed in a strange twilight of coexistence. Elena woke each morning in her pristine suite, ate breakfast alone in the enormous dining room, and spent her days either in the greenhouse Victor's staff had prepared for her work or out in the city photographing botanical subjects for her portfolio. She returned to the estate each evening, ate dinner alone, and retreated to her room before Victor returned from whatever dark business occupied his nights. They were ships passing in expensive hallways, their paths carefully choreographed to minimize contact. It should have been a relief. Instead, it felt like slowly disappearing. The estate employed a full staff: Margaret, 2 housekeepers, a chef, groundskeepers, security personnel who rotated in shifts. But Elena moved through the house like a ghost they'd all agreed to politely ignore. They were courteous, professional, and utterly indifferent to her presence beyond the scope of their duties. Even the chef stopped asking her preferences after the first week, simply preparing meals that appeared at precise intervals, whether Elena ate them or not. She'd become exactly what Victor had wanted: unobtrusive, uncomplicated, useful only in her capacity to appear beside him when required. Those appearances came every 2 weeks like clockwork: gallery openings, charity galas, business dinners with men whose smiles never reached their eyes, and women who assessed Elena with the cold calculation of jewelers examining a suspicious stone. Victor played the devoted husband flawlessly at these events. He'd materialize in her suite an hour before they needed to leave, always knocking, always waiting for her permission to enter despite the fact that this was his house. Margaret would have already laid out an appropriate dress, shoes, jewelry. Elena would emerge from her dressing room to find him waiting in his tailored tuxedo, checking his phone with the distracted air of a man whose mind was already 3 moves ahead in whatever game he was playing. "Ready?" he'd ask, not really looking at her. "Does it matter?" she'd reply. Then they'd descend to whatever car was waiting and drive in silence to whatever performance required their joint attendance. At the events themselves, Victor transformed. His hand would find the small of her back, warm and possessive. He'd lean in to murmur something inconsequential in her ear, his breath ghosting across her neck in a way that made her shiver despite herself. He'd introduce her to people whose names she forgot instantly, his arm around her waist, his smile proud and intimate. Anyone watching would have believed they were in love. The first time Elena felt his hand settle on her hip at a gallery opening, she'd stiffened reflexively. He'd leaned in, his lips brushing her ear. "Relax. You're supposed to enjoy my touch." "I'm supposed to tolerate it," she'd corrected in a whisper. "There's a difference." His fingers had tightened fractionally against her hip, not painful, just present. "Then tolerate it more convincingly." She'd learned to lean into him at these events, to smile and nod and play the part of the quietly content wife. She'd learned to recognize the different categories of people who populated Victor's world: the legitimate business associates who treated her with careful respect, the society wives who sized her up like competition, the dangerous men whose eyes held the same cold calculation as Victor's own. She'd learned that Victor never drank more than 1 glass of wine at these events, that he was always watching, always calculating, always aware of every person in the room and their exact position relative to him. She'd learned that he was brilliant at reading people, at saying exactly what they needed to hear, at making each person believe they had his complete attention, even as his mind worked 3 conversations ahead. And she'd learned that the moment they returned to the estate, the performance ended with surgical precision. He'd walk her to her suite, thank her for her time with impersonal courtesy, and disappear into his wing of the house as if she'd already ceased to exist. It was efficient, clean, exactly what they'd agreed to. So why did Elena feel like she was suffocating? She threw herself into her work with desperate focus. The greenhouse became her sanctuary, filled with rare specimens Victor's people acquired without question whenever she mentioned needing them. She photographed obsessively the unfurling of new leaves, the brief perfection of blooms, the intricate geometry of seed pods. Each image was a reminder that beauty existed outside of contracts and cold transactions, that growth happened whether witnessed or not. Her gallery representative was thrilled with the new work. "There's something different in these shots, Elena. More depth, more, emotional resonance. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." Elena didn't tell her that she was pouring all her unexpressed grief into documenting the life cycle of flowers, because it was safer than acknowledging the slow death of her own identity. 2 months after the wedding, Elena's mother called. "Mija, how are you? We haven't heard from you in weeks. Your father is worried. Is he?" Elena's voice came out flat. She was in the greenhouse, photographing a corpse flower that was finally beginning to bloom. The smell was overwhelming, rotting flesh, decay masquerading as life. Appropriate. "Elena, please, I know you're angry, but he did what he thought was best. He sold me to save his business, Mama. Let's not pretend it was more noble than that." Silence on the other end. Then quietly, "Are you happy?" Elena laughed, the sound bitter even to her own ears. "I'm useful. Isn't that what matters?" "That's not what I asked." "I'm fine, Mama. I have everything I need. Beautiful house, unlimited resources for my work, a husband who leaves me completely alone except when he needs me to smile at important people. It's exactly what was promised. Oh, mija, her mother's voice broke. I'm so sorry. If there was any other way, there wasn't. We all know that. I made my choice. I'm living with it. Elena adjusted her camera settings, focusing on the corpse flower's deep burgundy throat. I have to go. I'm working. She ended the call before her mother could respond, before the tears in her mother's voice could crack the careful numbness Elena had cultivated. The corpse flower bloomed over the next 3 days. Elena photographed every stage of its brief, spectacular decay. On the 4th day, it began to collapse, the flesh-colored spathe crumpling like discarded silk. Elena stood in the greenhouse and watched it die, and felt absolutely nothing. That evening was one of the scheduled events, a charity gala at the Biltmore, black tie required. Margaret had left a midnight blue gown in Elena's suite, sapphires to match. Elena went through the motions of preparation with mechanical precision: shower, hair, makeup, dress, jewelry. The woman in the mirror looked elegant and expensive and utterly empty. Victor knocked at 8 precisely. Come in, she called. He entered, devastating as always in his tuxedo, and stopped short. For the first time since she'd known him, something flickered across his face that might have been surprise. You look... He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Beautiful. I look like an expensive accessory, Elena corrected, fastening the sapphire bracelet, which is exactly what I'm supposed to be. Elena, don't. She turned to face him, and maybe something in her expression made him stop. Don't pretend this is anything other than what it is. You need arm candy for your gala. I'm providing it. Let's just get through tonight. Something tightened in his jaw, but he nodded. The car is ready. They drove in their usual silence, the city sliding past in streaks of light and shadow. Elena stared out the window and wondered what it would be like to be one of the people out there, walking freely down sidewalks, choosing their own destinations, living lives that belonged to them. The Biltmore was crowded with Los Angeles's elite, all air-kissed greetings and performative philanthropy. Victor's hand found Elena's back as they entered, and she allowed herself to be guided through the crowd, smiling at strangers, accepting compliments on her dress with gracious murmurs. Victor, darling, a woman in crimson descended on them, all white teeth and calculating eyes. And this must be your new bride. Elena, isn't it? I'm Veronica Hartwell. Victor and I go way back, don't we, darling? The way she said way back suggested a history Elena had no interest in exploring. Veronica, Victor acknowledged smoothly. How is Richard? Oh, you know Richard. Always busy making money. Rather like you, actually. Veronica's laugh was like wind chimes, bright and hollow. She turned to Elena with predatory interest. Tell me, dear, how did you capture our city's most elusive bachelor? We'd all given up hope anyone could pin him down. I didn't capture him, Elena said, her smile never wavering. We simply found we had compatible goals. How romantically pragmatic. Veronica's eyes gleamed. Well, aren't you two perfectly matched? Victor with his legendary emotional reserve and you with your compatible goals. If you'll excuse us, Victor interjected, his voice edged with frost. I see someone I need to speak with. He steered Elena away with gentle pressure at her back. Once they were out of Veronica's earshot, Elena felt him lean closer. Sorry about that. Veronica takes particular pleasure in being difficult. She's one of your exes, I assume. Briefly, years ago. Irrelevant now. Everything's irrelevant to you, isn't it? The words slipped out before Elena could stop them. Just transactions and arrangements and convenient solutions. Victor's hand stilled against her back. Elena, Mr. Karev. A portly man in an ill-fitting tuxedo approached, saving them both from whatever Victor had been about to say. I was hoping to catch you tonight. About that property development in Silver Lake. Elena tuned out as Victor shifted seamlessly into business mode, his attention focusing on the portly man with laser precision. She stood beside him, smiling pleasantly, feeling the weight of the sapphires around her neck like a collar. The evening crawled past. Elena made conversation with wives who looked through her as if she were transparent. She sipped champagne she didn't taste. She allowed Victor to dance with her during the required waltz, his hand at her waist, their bodies moving in perfect synchronization, despite the fact that they'd never danced together before. You're good at this, she observed as he guided her through a turn. At what? Pretending. Making it look real. His gray eyes found hers, unreadable in the ballroom's golden light. So are you. I've had a good teacher. Have I taught you so much? You've taught me how to be invisible while standing in plain sight. That's a useful skill. Something flickered in his expression, there and gone too quickly to identify. I never wanted you to be invisible. No? Then what did you want? The music swelled around them. Victor's hand tightened fractionally at her waist, pulling her incrementally closer. Someone who wouldn't ask for more than I could give. Congratulations, Elena said softly. You got exactly what you paid for. The song ended. Victor released her immediately, stepping back with his usual careful distance restored. I need to speak with someone about a shipping contract. Can you manage alone for 20 minutes? I've been managing alone for months, Elena replied. 20 more minutes won't kill me. He left her near the bar, disappearing into the crowd with the ease of a predator in his natural habitat. Elena ordered another champagne she wouldn't drink and tried to look like she belonged among people who measured their worth in zeros and social capital. You look miserable. Elena turned to find a woman about her age, dark-skinned and striking in a gold gown, studying her with open curiosity rather than the usual polite indifference. I look perfectly content, Elena corrected automatically. You look like you'd rather be anywhere else on Earth. The woman extended her hand. Simone Laurent, my husband is the unfortunate man currently boring your husband about shipping containers. Elena Karev. The name still felt strange in her mouth. And I don't think Victor's capable of being bored. He's too busy calculating profit margins. Simone laughed, a genuine sound that made Elena almost smile. Oh, I like you. You're not like the usual society robots. How long have you been married? 3 months? And how long have you been dying inside? The blunt question caught Elena off guard. She looked at Simone more carefully, saw real interest in the other woman's eyes rather than gossip-hungry calculation. Is it that obvious? Elena asked quietly. Only to someone who's been there. Simone sipped her champagne. I married Marcus 5 years ago. Arranged, like yours. My family's fashion empire needed his family's manufacturing connections. First 2 years were hell. We were strangers playing house, too proud to admit we were miserable. What changed? I got pregnant. Simone's smile was complicated. Unplanned, unexpected, and absolutely terrifying. But it forced us to actually talk to each other, to be real instead of performing all the time. Turns out under all the business arrangement bullshit, we actually liked each other. Now we're disgustingly happy. Who knew? That's a beautiful story, Elena said carefully, but I don't think it applies to my situation. No? You're telling me you and Victor Karev have some special brand of incompatibility that makes human connection impossible? I'm telling you that what Victor and I have is exactly what we both agreed to. A clean transaction, no complications. Honey, there's no such thing as a clean transaction when two people live together. Simone tilted her head, studying Elena. You know what your problem is? You're treating this like a prison sentence, counting down the days until you're free. But you're already here. You might as well make it livable. I don't want to make it livable, Elena said. I want to survive it with enough of myself intact that I remember who I was before. And who were you before? The question hit harder than Elena expected. Who had she been? The photographer who documented beauty, the daughter who'd sacrificed herself to save her family, the woman who'd dreamed of simple things like love and partnership and being seen. Someone happier, Elena finally said. Simone's expression softened with understanding. For what it's worth, Victor's looking at you right now like you're the only person in this room. Elena followed Simone's gaze and found Victor across the crowded ballroom, still engaged in conversation with Simone's husband, but his eyes fixed on Elena with an intensity that made her breath catch. The moment their eyes met, he looked away, refocusing on the business discussion as if the moment of distraction had never happened. He always looks away, Elena murmured. Maybe he doesn't know how to keep looking, Simone suggested. Men like Victor, men who've built their lives on control and distance, they don't know what to do when something makes them feel. So they do what they know. They retreat. You're reading too much into a business arrangement. Maybe, Simone smiled, Or maybe you're both so committed to your story about what this is that you can't see what it could be. Before Elena could respond, their husbands returned, Victor's hand automatically finding Elena's back in that possessive gesture that meant nothing and everything. "We should go," Victor said. "Early meeting tomorrow." Elena allowed herself to be guided out, exchanging contact information with Simone at the last moment, a small rebellion claiming something for herself in this carefully controlled existence. The drive home was silent as always, but Elena felt Victor's glances in her direction, brief and searching, as if he were trying to solve an equation that refused to balance. Inside the estate, they followed their usual routine, Victor walking her to her suite, thanking her with impersonal courtesy. But tonight, something was different. He paused at her door, hand still on the doorknob, not quite meeting her eyes. "Veronica was wrong," he said quietly. "About what?" "About me being emotionally reserved." He finally looked at her, and Elena saw something raw in his gray eyes, there and gone in a heartbeat. "I'm not reserved, I'm careful. There's a difference." "Why are you telling me this?" "I don't know." He released the doorknob, stepping back. "Good night, Elena." He was halfway down the hall before Elena found her voice. "Victor?" He stopped but didn't turn around. "Why did you really need a wife? You could have found someone who wanted this life, someone who would have been happy to be Mrs. Victor Karev. Why force someone who didn't want it?" For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, still facing away from her, he spoke. "Because the women who want this life want something from me. They want my money, my name, my connections. They want to change me, fix me, understand me. You want none of those things. You want exactly what I promised you, protection for your family and freedom from expectations. That makes you the only honest person I've met in a very long time. I'm not honest. I'm trapped. So am I." He looked back at her then, and Elena saw exhaustion in the lines of his face. "Good night, Elena." This time when he walked away, she let him go. Elena locked herself in her suite and stood at the window overlooking the city. Below, Los Angeles glittered with the lives of millions of people she'd never meet, each one living their own version of freedom or captivity. She thought about Simone's words, about the idea that this could be livable rather than simply survivable. She thought about the way Victor had looked at her across the ballroom, the intensity in his eyes before he'd looked away. She thought about the fact that she'd been so focused on preserving who she'd been that she'd never considered who she might become. The sapphires were heavy around her neck. Elena unfastened them carefully, laying them in their velvet case like captured stars. She caught sight of her reflection in the mirror, elegant, expensive, hollow. But maybe, she thought with something that might have been the faintest stirring of curiosity, maybe hollow spaces could be filled. Maybe prisons could have unlocked doors if you were brave enough to try the handle. Maybe survival wasn't the same as living, and she'd spent 3 months confusing the two. Elena turned away from the window, from the glittering city and its million distant lives. Tomorrow she'd wake up and return to her greenhouse, to her photographs of beautiful things that grew and bloomed and died, whether witnessed or not. But tonight, she'd allow herself to wonder what might happen if she stopped treating this marriage like a sentence to be endured and started treating it like a mystery to be solved. What was Victor Karev hiding behind all that careful distance? What had taught him that emotions were dangerous enough to lock away? And why did Elena suddenly want to know? The questions followed her into sleep, restless and insistent as the stirring of new growth beneath winter soil. Somewhere in the east wing, Victor stood at his own window, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand, staring at the city lights and wondering why 3 months of successfully maintaining distance suddenly felt like failure. He'd wanted uncomplicated. He'd gotten exactly that. So why did Elena's hollow eyes haunt him? Why did her mechanical smile at events make his chest tighten with something uncomfortably close to guilt? Why had he told her he was careful rather than reserved, offering her a truth he'd meant to keep locked away? Victor drained the whiskey in one burning swallow and turned away from the window, from thoughts of his ghost wife in her golden cage. This was what they'd agreed to. Clean, simple, temporary. He needed to remember that. They both did. The shift began so gradually that Elena almost didn't notice it happening. The morning after the gala, she woke to find a note slipped under her door. Victor's handwriting, precise and controlled. The orchid catalog you mentioned arrived. I had it placed in the greenhouse. V. Elena stood in her doorway holding the cream cardstock, remembering a conversation from weeks ago at some forgettable dinner party. She'd mentioned wanting a particular rare orchid catalog to a botanist guest, barely aware that Victor had been standing close enough to overhear. She hadn't expected him to remember, let alone act on it. In the greenhouse, she found the catalog exactly where the note promised, along with something she hadn't expected. A new ventilation system had been installed overnight, the kind she'd complained about needing to Margaret months ago, but had never followed up on. Elena ran her fingers along the new equipment, confusion warring with something dangerously close to gratitude. This wasn't part of their arrangement. This was attention. This was Victor noticing details about her life and responding to needs she hadn't explicitly stated. This was dangerous territory. She should have ignored it, filed it away as coincidence or Margaret's efficiency. Instead, she found herself in the kitchen that evening, asking the chef what Victor's favorite meal was. The chef looked startled, probably the first time Elena had shown interest in anything beyond her own solitary dinners. Mr. Karev prefers simple food when he's home. Steak, vegetables, nothing elaborate. He saves the fancy meals for business. That night, Elena left a note on Victor's office door. Thank you for the catalog and the ventilation system. She didn't expect a response, but the next evening, she found a book on her desk. A first edition photography collection she'd mentioned admiring in passing at a gallery months ago. No note this time. Just the book. Wrapped simply, unmistakably a gift. Elena traced the embossed cover and felt something crack in the careful walls she'd built around herself. She started looking for him in the house. Not obviously, not desperately. But she found herself lingering in the library during hours she knew he sometimes worked from home, taking her coffee in the morning room where he occasionally read the newspaper before leaving for the office, timing her returns from photography sessions to coincide with his arrival home. At first, their interactions remained carefully neutral, a nod in passing, a murmured good morning, the polite acknowledgement of two people sharing space without truly occupying the same world. But small things began to accumulate like sediment, building into something neither of them had names for. One evening, Elena found Victor in the library, surrounded by contracts, his tie loosened and exhaustion carved into the lines of his face. She'd intended to grab a book and leave, but something in his posture stopped her. Long day? She asked, the words foreign after months of practiced silence. Victor looked up, surprise flickering across his face before his usual mask settled back into place. Complicated negotiations. The other party is being deliberately obtuse. Sounds frustrating. It's business. Frustration is part of the process. Elena moved further into the room, drawn by something she couldn't quite name. Do you ever get tired of it? The constant chess game always being 3 moves ahead? Every day? The admission seemed to surprise him as much as it surprised her. But it's what I know, what I'm good at. That doesn't mean it's all you are. Victor studied her, his gray eyes searching. What else would I be? The question hung between them, genuine and unexpectedly vulnerable. Elena thought about all the things she'd observed about him over these months. His precision, his control, the way he moved through the world like a man who'd learned early that showing weakness meant destruction. I don't know, she admitted. You don't let anyone close enough to find out. Neither do you. I'm here against my will. What's your excuse? Something that might have been a smile ghosted across his lips. Habit, self-preservation. Take your pick. Oh, those aren't mutually exclusive. No, Victor agreed quietly. They're not. They stood in the library's amber light, the space between them charged with questions neither quite dared to ask. Then Victor's phone buzzed, shattering the moment. He glanced at it, his expression hardening. I need to take this. Excuse me. He left, taking his walls with him, leaving Elena alone among the books, and the ghost of whatever had almost happened. But something had shifted. A door had opened a crack, letting in light neither of them had realized they'd been missing. The next morning, Elena found Victor in the kitchen, a first in their 4 months of cohabitation. He stood at the coffee maker in dress pants and an undone shirt, looking rumpled and human in a way she'd never seen him. Morning, he said, his voice rough with sleep. Morning. Elena tried not to stare at the way his shirt hung open, revealing a strip of chest and the edge of what looked like a scar. "I didn't know you made your own coffee." "Usually I don't. Early meeting got moved up. Chef doesn't start until 7. He poured a second cup without asking and handed it to her. "Milk, no sugar, right?" Elena took the cup, surprised he'd noticed. "Right, thanks." They stood in the kitchen's marble expanse, drinking coffee in companionable silence. Outside, dawn was breaking over the city, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. "Your exhibit at the Brennan Gallery opens next week," Victor said suddenly. Elena nearly dropped her cup. "How did you know about that?" "Margaret mentioned it. You've been spending a lot of time at the gallery preparing." He paused, something uncertain crossing his face. "Would it be appropriate for me to attend? Or would you prefer I stay away?" Elena hadn't expected the question, hadn't expected him to know about her work, let alone care enough to ask about attending. "You can come if you want. It's just botanical photography. Probably boring for someone who's not interested in plants." "I'm interested in things that matter to you." The statement landed between them, simple and devastating. Elena met his eyes and saw something raw there, quickly shuddered. "Then yes," she said carefully, "you should come." "I will." He rinsed his cup, buttoned his shirt with efficient movements, and left for his meeting, leaving Elena alone with her coffee and the stunning realization that somewhere along the way, Victor had started paying attention. The gallery opening arrived wrapped in Elena's anxiety. Her work had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable. These photographs were different from her earlier pieces, darker, more emotionally complex. They documented beauty and decay, strength and fragility, the quiet resilience of things that bloomed in darkness. They were, she realized with uncomfortable clarity, about her own transformation, about surviving in impossible circumstances, about finding moments of grace in a life she hadn't chosen. Victor arrived exactly when he said he would, devastating in a charcoal suit, drawing eyes the moment he entered the gallery. Elena watched people recognize him, watched the ripple of interest spread through the crowd. She braced herself for him to work the room, to treat this like another networking opportunity. Instead, he came directly to her, his hand finding the small of her back in that gesture that had become familiar. But this time, it felt different. Less performance, more anchor. "Show me your work," he said quietly. Elena led him through the exhibit, explaining each series, the technical challenges, the stories behind individual shots. She expected polite interest, the glazed expression of someone humoring a spouse's hobby. What she got instead was Victor's complete focus. He studied each photograph with the same intensity he brought to business negotiations, asking thoughtful questions, making observations that revealed a surprising understanding of composition and light. This one, he stopped before a photograph of a night-blooming cereus, its white petals luminous against darkness. "This is different from the others." "I took that the night of our wedding," Elena admitted. "I couldn't sleep. Found it blooming in the greenhouse around 3 in the morning. They only bloom once a year, and only for a few hours." "Beauty that exists whether witnessed or not," Victor murmured, his eyes still on the photograph. "Exactly." He turned to look at her then, and Elena felt the weight of his gaze like a physical touch. "You're extraordinarily talented. This work deserves to be seen." "Thank you." The words felt inadequate for the sudden tightness in her chest. They were interrupted by the gallery owner, by collectors wanting to discuss purchases, by the inevitable social performance. But for the rest of the evening, Elena felt hyper-aware of Victor's presence. He didn't leave her side except when she needed to speak privately with clients. He brought her wine when her glass emptied. He ran interference with a particularly aggressive collector who couldn't take a polite no for an answer. He acted, Elena realized with dawning wonder, like a real partner. Simone appeared midway through the evening, resplendent in emerald silk. "Elena, this work is stunning. I'm buying the serious piece before anyone else can claim it." She glanced at Victor, then back at Elena, her smile knowing. "You two look different tonight." "Different how?" Elena asked. "Like you might actually like each other." Simone squeezed her hand. "Call me this week. Coffee. I want details." After the opening, Victor drove them home in uncharacteristic silence. Elena watched the city lights blur past, processing the evening. the way something fundamental had shifted between them without either of them acknowledging it aloud. Inside the estate, they followed their usual routine up the stairs, down the hall, toward her suite. But at her door, Victor didn't immediately leave. "Thank you for letting me come tonight," he said. "Thank you for coming, and for staying. You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to." He paused, and Elena saw him wrestling with something. "Elena, there's something I need to tell you." Her heart kicked against her ribs. "Okay? This arrangement between us. I know what we agreed to. I know the terms. But somewhere along the way, it's become—" He stopped, frustration tightening his jaw. "I'm not good at this. At saying what I mean when it's personal." "Try," Elena heard herself say. "I'll wait." Victor's eyes met hers, and she saw vulnerability there that took her breath away. "You've become more than useful to me, more than convenient. And I don't know what to do with that." "What do you want to do with it?" "I want—" He lifted his hand, hesitated, then gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered against her cheek, warm and careful. "I want to know if you'd have dinner with me tomorrow night. Not for an event, not for show, just us." Elena's breath caught. This was dangerous. This was the opposite of their agreement. This was the beginning of complications they'd both sworn to avoid. "Yes," she whispered anyway. Victor's hand fell away, but his eyes held hers. 7 o'clock. I'll cook." "You cook?" "Occasionally, when it matters." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Good night, Elena." "Good night?" Elena locked herself in her suite and pressed her back against the door, her heart racing. What had just happened? What had they agreed to? And why did the thought of dinner with Victor feel more terrifying than their wedding had? She caught sight of herself in the mirror, flushed, alive, no longer hollow. When had that changed? When had she stopped feeling like a ghost in this house and started feeling like someone who might belong here? The answer, she realized, was gradual. It had been accumulating in small moments: the catalog, the ventilation system, the coffee in the morning kitchen, Victor's attention at her exhibit. Each gesture building into something neither of them had intended, but both of them had somehow created anyway. Elena changed into sleep clothes and climbed into bed, but sleep was impossible. Her mind raced with possibilities and dangers, with the terrifying realization that she'd stopped counting down the days until freedom and started noticing the way Victor's rare smiles transformed his face. In the East Wing, Victor stood at his window with another untouched whiskey, berating himself for the invitation that had slipped out before he could stop it. This wasn't the plan. The plan was distance. The plan was temporary. The plan was to keep Elena safely categorized as a business arrangement so his life could continue unchanged. But somewhere between the wedding and tonight, Elena had stopped being a transaction and become a person he thought about, a woman whose hollow eyes haunted him, an artist whose work revealed depths he wanted to explore, a wife he was beginning to want in ways the contract had never anticipated. Victor drained the whiskey, welcoming the burn. Tomorrow night would either be the beginning of something terrifying or the mistake that reminded them both why distance was safer. Either way, he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. They both had. The next day passed in slow agony. Elena tried to work in the greenhouse but couldn't focus. She changed clothes 3 times, trying to find something appropriate for a dinner that felt weighted with significance she couldn't quite name. Not too formal, not too casual, nothing that screamed she'd spent hours agonizing over the choice. She settled on simple black pants and a soft gray sweater, minimal jewelry, her hair loose. At 7 precisely, she descended to the dining room and found it transformed. The long formal table had been replaced by a small round table set for 2. Candles flickered in simple glass holders. Music played softly from hidden speakers. Jazz, instrumental, sophisticated without being pretentious. Victor emerged from the kitchen wearing jeans and a navy Henley, more casual than she'd ever seen him. He looked younger somehow, less armored. "I hope you like pasta," he said, and there was something endearing about the uncertainty in his voice. "It's one of the few things I make well." "I love pasta." He'd made carbonara, simple and perfect. They ate at the intimate table, and for the first time in months of living together, they talked, really talked, without the careful barriers that had defined every previous interaction. "Tell me about your family," Elena said. I've told you about mine, but I don't know anything about yours. Victor's fork paused halfway to his mouth. There's not much to tell. My parents died when I was 16. Car accident. I was already working for a man who ran shipping operations. Legitimate on paper, less legitimate in practice. After my parents died, that work became my entire life. I'm sorry. That must have been terrible. It was survival. Victor resumed eating, but his jaw was tight. The man I worked for, Dmitri, he taught me everything. How to read people, how to spot weakness, how to turn disadvantage into leverage. He also taught me that caring about people makes you vulnerable, that love is a weapon someone can use against you. That's a brutal lesson for a teenager. It kept me alive. Dmitri had enemies, people who would have used anyone close to him as leverage. So I learned not to be close to anyone, not to need anyone, to keep everything transactional and clean. Elena set down her fork, her heart aching for the boy who'd learned to equate isolation with safety. What happened to Dmitri? He was killed 6 years ago, power struggle with a rival organization. He'd been grooming me to take over, teaching me how to consolidate legitimate and illegitimate operations. When he died, I stepped in, cleaned house, eliminated the people who'd killed him, built something more sustainable, more protected. More isolated, Elena added quietly. Victor's eyes met hers. Yes, more isolated, until 3 months ago when I acquired a wife who was supposed to make my life simpler and instead makes me question everything I thought I knew about safety. The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Elena reached across the table, her hand covering his. I'm terrified too. This wasn't supposed to happen. No, Victor agreed, turning his hand to lace his fingers through hers. It wasn't. They sat in candlelight, hands intertwined, while the jazz played softly and everything they'd carefully avoided acknowledging finally surfaced. I don't know how to do this, Victor said, how to care about someone without it destroying me. I don't know either. I've spent months trying not to care about you, trying to just survive until I could leave. But somewhere along the way, I stopped wanting to leave and started wanting to understand you. Why? I haven't given you any reason to. Haven't you? Elena squeezed his hand. The catalog, the ventilation system, coming to my exhibit, making me dinner. These aren't the actions of a man who wants distance. They're the actions of a man who's terrified of what he's feeling and doesn't know how to stop it from happening. Elena stood, still holding his hand, and moved around the table until she was standing beside him. Victor looked up at her, his gray eyes storm-dark and vulnerable in ways she'd never seen. What if we stop fighting it? She suggested softly. What if we just see what happens when we're honest with each other? That's not what we agreed to. No, but maybe what we agreed to was wrong. Maybe we both thought we wanted simple and transactional when what we actually needed was real. Victor stood, close enough now that Elena could feel the heat radiating from his body. His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. If we do this, he said, his voice rough, if we cross this line, I can't promise I'll know how to love you the way you deserve. I've spent too many years learning how not to feel. Then we'll learn together, because I don't know how to do this either. I've spent months protecting myself from you, and I'm tired of it. I'm tired of being lonely in a house full of people. I'm tired of pretending you're just a contract when you've become so much more than that. Victor's forehead dropped to rest against hers, his breath warm against her lips. Elena, kiss me, she whispered. Not for show, not for appearances, just because you want to. For a heartbeat, Victor didn't move. Then his mouth found hers, and the kiss was nothing like the brief, impersonal touch at their wedding. This was heat and hunger, careful restraint giving way to something raw and desperate. His hand slid into her hair, tilting her head back as he deepened the kiss, and Elena's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victor's carefully controlled facade had shattered completely. He looked young and uncertain and utterly human. I don't know what I'm doing, he admitted. Neither do I. Elena smiled, her lips still tingling from his kiss. But maybe that's okay. Maybe we can figure it out together. This changes everything. I know. Victor pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her and burying his face in her hair. Elena held him back, feeling the rapid beat of his heart against her chest, both of them trembling with the enormity of what they'd just begun. They stood in the candlelit dining room, holding each other like lifelines, while the jazz played softly and the life they'd carefully constructed around distance and transaction crumbled into something infinitely more dangerous and real. Later, much later, they moved to the library. They sat on the leather couch, Elena curled against Victor's side, his arm around her shoulders. They talked through the night, about childhoods and losses, dreams and fears, all the things they'd spent months carefully avoiding. Elena learned that Victor read poetry when he couldn't sleep, that he'd wanted to be an architect before circumstances forced him into Dimitri's world, that he visited his parents' graves every year on the anniversary of their death and spoke to them about the life he'd built from the ashes of theirs. Victor learned that Elena had been engaged once, briefly, to a man who'd wanted her to give up photography and be a proper wife, that she'd chosen her art over security and never regretted it, that her favorite sound in the world was rain on greenhouse glass, that she'd spent the first month in his house crying herself to sleep every night. "I'm sorry," Victor said quietly, his fingers tracing patterns on her shoulder. "I knew you were miserable. I told myself it didn't matter, that you'd adjust, the distance was cleaner, but I saw your eyes getting hollower, and it gutted me even though I pretended it didn't. Why didn't you say anything?" Because saying something would have meant admitting I cared, and caring was exactly what I'd promised myself I wouldn't do. When did that change? Victor was quiet for a long moment. The night of the Biltmore Gala, when Veronica said you'd learn to be as emotionally reserved as me, I realized I'd taught you to be hollow, that my distance had infected you, and I hated it. I hated what I was doing to you. So you started leaving notes and books and fixing my greenhouse. Small things, safe things, ways to show I was paying attention without having to actually be vulnerable about it. He laughed softly, bitterly. Pathetic, really. A grown man leaving gifts like breadcrumbs because he's too afraid to have an actual conversation. Elena tilted her head to look up at him. It wasn't pathetic. It was sweet. And it worked. You got my attention. And now? Now I'm here. Choosing to be here for the first time since the wedding. Not because I have to, because I want to. Victor's arms tightened around her. I don't want to hurt you. Then don't. Be honest with me. Let me see you, the real you, not the careful mask you show everyone else. The real me is damaged, Elena. Broken in ways I don't know how to fix. We're all damaged, Elena said gently. The question is whether we're willing to let someone help us heal, or whether we'd rather stay broken alone. Victor kissed the top of her head, and Elena felt him trembling. This terrified him, she realized. Being seen, being vulnerable, allowing someone close enough to matter. For a man who'd built his life on control and distance, this was an act of profound courage. Dawn was breaking by the time they finally pulled apart, both exhausted and wired, the air between them charged with new possibilities. I should let you sleep, Victor said, though he made no move to release her. I don't want to sleep. I don't want this night to end. It doesn't have to. We can have breakfast together. Talk more. Figure out what this is, what we want it to be. Elena smiled, and it felt like the first genuine smile she'd worn in months. I'd like that. They made breakfast together in the enormous kitchen, moving around each other with surprising ease. Victor cooked eggs while Elena made toast, and they ate at the kitchen island, their knees touching, hands finding each other between bites. This, Elena thought, was what a marriage could look like. Not performance or transaction, but genuine partnership. Two broken people choosing to build something real from the wreckage of their carefully constructed distance. It was terrifying and exhilarating and nothing like what she'd imagined when she'd signed that contract 4 months ago. And for the first time since her father had destroyed her life with his desperate choices, Elena felt something she'd thought she'd lost forever. She felt hope. The next 2 weeks unfolded like a dream Elena was afraid to wake from. Victor rearranged his schedule to have breakfast with her every morning. They'd sit in the morning room with coffee and newspapers, their ankles tangled under the table, occasionally reading passages aloud to each other. Elena learned that Victor had strong opinions about urban development and a wicked sense of humor he rarely showed anyone. Victor discovered that Elena talked to her plants and had memorized obscure botanical facts she'd recite or get random moments. They had dinner together most nights, taking turns cooking or sitting in the kitchen while the chef prepared meals, talking through the day's events. Elena told him about a particularly difficult photograph she'd been trying to capture. Victor explained the intricacies of a shipping contract dispute, making her laugh with his acidic commentary about the opposing counsel's incompetence. They were learning each other, piece by careful piece, but they hadn't slept together, hadn't even discussed it. Victor still disappeared to his wing each night, though now he'd linger at Elena's door, kissing her goodnight with an intensity that left them both shaken. His hands would frame her face, his thumbs stroking her cheeks as if she were something precious he was afraid to break. "I'm not made of glass," Elena told him one night, breathless from his kiss. "I won't shatter if you touch me." "I know." Victor's forehead rested against hers, his breathing ragged. "But I need to do this right, to not rush something this important. We're already married. I don't think there are rules about rushing. There are for me." He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. "I've spent my entire adult life taking what I wanted without considering consequences. With you, I want to be different. I want to be worthy of what you're offering." Elena's heart cracked open a little more. "You already are." "Not yet, but I'm trying." So they waited, building something slower and more deliberate than Elena had known was possible. They held hands while watching movies in the screening room. Victor pulled her into his lap while they read in the library, his chin resting on her shoulder, occasionally pressing kisses to her neck that made her lose her place on the page. Elena would find him in his office late at night, massage the tension from his shoulders, and listen while he talked through whatever problem was keeping him working past midnight. It felt domestic and surreal, this marriage that had started as a cold transaction transforming into something warm and real. Elena met Simone for coffee as promised, in a small cafe in Silver Lake that felt blissfully anonymous. "You're glowing," Simone said immediately, her eyes sharp with interest. Something changed. Elena couldn't stop the smile that spread across her face. "Everything changed. We had dinner, we talked, we stopped pretending this was just a business arrangement. And?" Simone leaned forward. "Details, woman, I need details. We're taking things slow, getting to know each other. It's strange and wonderful and terrifying all at once. You're falling for him. I think I already have." Elena wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "Which is insane, right? 4 months ago I hated him, hated everything he represented. And now I wake up looking forward to breakfast together. I find myself waiting for him to come home. She stopped, overwhelmed by the enormity of it. "You love him," Simone said gently. "I don't know if it's love yet, but it could be. It's heading that direction so fast it scares me. Does he feel the same way?" Elena thought about the way Victor looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, like she was a puzzle he was desperate to solve. The careful tenderness in his touch, as if she might disappear if he held too tight or not tight enough. The vulnerability in his eyes when he told her about his parents, about Dmitri, about all the ways he'd learned to survive by never letting anyone matter. "I think he's afraid to," Elena admitted. "He spent so long protecting himself that letting me in goes against every instinct he's developed. But he's trying. That has to count for something." "It counts for everything," Simone assured her. "Men like Victor and Marcus, they don't know how to do halfway. When they finally let someone in, it's complete, total, all or nothing. That's what scares me. What if I'm not enough? What if he opens up completely and decides I don't fill whatever void he's been protecting?" Simone reached across the table, squeezing Elena's hand. "Honey, I've seen the way that man looks at you. You're not just filling a void, you're teaching him that voids can be healed. That's so much more powerful." Elena wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that this fragile new thing between them could survive the weight of Victor's damage and her own fears. She just wasn't sure either of them knew how to hold something this precious without crushing it. The cracks started small. Elena noticed Victor on his phone more often, his conversations terse and coded. He'd step away when calls came in, returning with tension carved into his shoulders. When she asked if everything was okay, he'd smile tightly and say it was just business. But Elena had learned to read him. This wasn't just business. This was something that had him worried. One evening, Elena came downstairs to find Victor in the library with three men she'd never seen before. They had the same dangerous quality as the men who'd occasionally appeared at events, the ones whose eyes tracked exits and whose suits concealed weapons. Victor saw her in the doorway and stood immediately. "Elena, I didn't realize you were still up." "I was reading in bed. Came down for water." She looked at the strangers, then back at Victor. "Should I go?" "No, we were just finishing." Victor's voice held an edge she hadn't heard in weeks. He turned to the men. "We'll continue this tomorrow. Dimitri's old warehouse, noon." The men filed out, and Elena heard the front door close behind them. Victor stood with his back to her, tension radiating from every line of his body. "What's going on?" Elena asked quietly. "Nothing you need to worry about." "Victor, I said it's nothing." He turned, and his face was the cold mask she remembered from their wedding day. The warmth that had been growing between them had vanished, replaced by the dangerous stranger who'd bought her father's debt. "Go back to bed, Elena. This doesn't concern you." The dismissal stung worse than a slap. Elena felt something inside her chest freeze over. "Fine. I'll remember that I don't concern you next time you want to have breakfast together." She left before he could respond, climbing the stairs with her spine rigid and tears burning behind her eyes. In her suite, she locked the door and sat on the edge of her bed, shaking with hurt and anger. This was what she'd been afraid of. That Victor's walls would slam back into place the moment things got difficult. That he'd retreat into the cold, controlled man who dealt with problems through distance and dominance. That she'd be shut out the instant his dangerous world intruded on the fragile domesticity they'd built. Elena didn't sleep. She listened to Victor's footsteps in the hallway hours later, heard him pause outside her door, waited for the knock that never came. By morning, exhaustion and hurt had crystallized into determination. She wasn't going to be dismissed, wasn't going to let Victor retreat without a fight. She found him in the kitchen, drinking coffee and staring at his phone with haunted eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept either. "We need to talk," Elena said. Victor glanced up, his expression carefully neutral. "Elena, last night, was you shutting me out the second things got complicated?" "I know. That's what we're going to talk about." "This isn't a good time." "It never will be if we keep waiting for perfect moments." Elena poured herself coffee with steady hands, refusing to let him see how much his coldness had hurt. "You told me you wanted to be different with me, that you were trying, but the first time your business intrudes, you turn back into the man who bought me like property. So which version is real, Victor? The one who makes me breakfast and kisses me goodnight, or the one who tells me to go to bed like I'm a child who can't handle adult problems?" Victor set down his phone, his jaw tight. "You don't understand the world I operate in, the dangers, the complications. Then explain them to me instead of shutting me out. I'm trying to protect you." "I don't need protection. I need honesty." Elena moved closer, refusing to back down. "I need you to trust me enough to tell me what's happening. Otherwise, we're just playing house, and the first real storm will destroy us." Victor's hands clenched into fists on the counter. "There's a situation developing. Someone from Dimitri's old organization is making moves, trying to take territory I've held for years. The men last night were my security detail. We're handling it." Define handling it. "Elena, no, you don't get to give me the sanitized version. If we're doing this, if we're actually building something real, then I need to know who you are. All of you, including the parts that scare you." Victor's laugh was bitter. "You want to know who I am? I'm the man who's killed people, Elena, who's ordered executions and burned businesses to the ground, who's built an empire on fear and violence and carefully calibrated cruelty. That's the reality you're asking to be part of." Elena held his gaze, refusing to flinch. "I know what you are. I've always known. You think I didn't research you before I signed that contract? I knew exactly what kind of man I was marrying. What I didn't know was whether there was anything human underneath all that calculated ruthlessness. These past 2 weeks showed me there is. Don't hide that person from me now. That person is a liability in my world. Caring about you makes me vulnerable. So let yourself be vulnerable. Let me be strong enough to handle it." Victor moved around the counter with predatory grace, stopping close enough that Elena could feel the heat radiating from his body. "You have no idea what you're asking. If word gets out that I care about you, that you matter to me, you become a target. Every enemy I have will see you as leverage. Then we'll deal with it together. Elena reached up, cupping his face in her hands. I'm not asking you to make me a liability. I'm asking you to make me a partner. There's a difference. For a long moment, Victor just stared at her, something breaking behind his eyes. Then he pulled her roughly against him, burying his face in her hair. I don't know how to do this, he said, his voice muffled. How to let you in without it destroying me, without it destroying you. We figure it out as we go, but we do it together, or we don't do it at all. Elena held him tight, feeling him tremble against her. Talk to me. Tell me what's happening. Victor pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. His name is Alexei Volkov. He worked for Dmitri, thought he deserved the organization when Dmitri died. I proved him wrong and forced him out of the city. Now he's back and he's targeting my operations. Burning warehouses, intimidating my people, trying to provoke me into a response that will start an all-out war. What are you going to do? End it. Quickly, decisively, before it escalates further. Victor's eyes had gone cold, and Elena saw the dangerous man he became when his control was threatened. But I need to do it carefully. Volkov is unstable, unpredictable. If he realizes you matter to me, he'll come after you. That's why I need you to stay here, stay safe, and let me handle this. How long will it take? A few days, maybe a week. I'm meeting with my people today to finalize the plan. He hesitated. There's going to be violence, Elena. I need you to understand that. What I have to do to end this, it's not going to be clean or civilized. I understand. Do you? Because once you see that side of me, once you know exactly what I'm capable of, you might not want me anymore. And his voice cracked. I don't know if I can survive you walking away now. Not after I've let you in. Elena kissed him, hard and fierce, pouring everything she felt into the connection. When she pulled back, she saw wonder in his eyes. I'm not walking away, she said firmly. Do what you need to do. End this threat. But come back to me. That's all I'm asking. Victor's arms tightened around her. I promise. He left an hour later, surrounded by security, and Elena was alone in the enormous house with her fear and determination tangled into knots she couldn't untie. The next 3 days were torture. Victor called once a day, brief check-ins to confirm she was safe. His voice was distant, controlled, the warmth she'd grown accustomed to buried under layers of strategic focus. Elena tried to work in the greenhouse but couldn't concentrate. She'd find herself standing at windows, watching the gate, waiting for Victor to return. Margaret appeared regularly with updates delivered in her calm, professional tone. Mr. Karev was handling the situation. Security had been increased around the estate. Elena should continue her normal routine and not worry. As if not worrying was possible when the man she was falling in love with was somewhere in the city doing violence she could only imagine. On the 4th day, Elena woke to complete silence. The usual sounds of the estate were absent. No kitchen noises, no gardeners outside her window, no footsteps in distant hallways. The silence was absolute and wrong. Elena grabbed her phone. No signal. Her heart started pounding. She moved to her door, opened it carefully. The hallway was empty. She made her way downstairs, every instinct screaming that something was terribly wrong. The security panel by the front door was dark. The cameras were offline. And when Elena tried the door, she found it unlocked. Someone had breached the estate. Elena's breath came fast and shallow. She needed to hide, to call for help, to... Glass shattered in the library. Heavy footsteps. Male voices speaking Russian in tones that made her blood run cold. They were inside. Elena ran, her bare feet silent on marble floors. She made it to the kitchen, grabbed a knife from the block, and pressed herself into the walk-in pantry. Her hand shook so badly she nearly dropped the knife. The footsteps grew louder, multiple men searching the house room by room. "Find the wife!" someone barked in Russian. "Volkov wants her alive." Terror flooded Elena's system. This was what Victor had been afraid of. This was why he'd wanted to keep her at distance, why he'd tried to protect her from his world. And now his world had found her anyway. The pantry door opened. Elena didn't think. She lunged with the knife, catching the man across the forearm. He shouted in pain and surprise, stumbling back. Elena ran past him, sprinting for the back door. She made it outside, her feet hitting grass, running for the tree line at the edge of the property. Behind her, men shouted. Something whined past her ear, a bullet, she realized with numb horror. They were shooting at her. Elena zigzagged, using every action movie trick she'd ever seen, knowing it was probably useless but unable to stop trying. She was almost to the trees when something slammed into her from the side, taking her to the ground hard enough to knock the wind from her lungs. Hands grabbed her, rough and bruising. Elena fought like a wild thing, kicking and scratching and biting. She heard someone curse in Russian as her teeth found flesh. Then something hard connected with her temple, and the world went gray at the edges. "Enough," a new voice said, cold and amused. "Bring her. Karev will come for her, and when he does, we'll be waiting." Elena was hauled to her feet, her vision swimming. She saw a man in his 50s, gray-haired and sharp-featured, watching her with the detached interest of a scientist examining an insect. Alexei Volkov. "You're prettier than I expected," Volkov said in accented English. "Victor always did have expensive taste. Let's see how much you're worth to him." Elena was dragged to a waiting van, her head throbbing, terror and fury warring in her chest. As they pulled away from the estate, she caught sight of the security team, unconscious or dead, she couldn't tell, scattered across the grounds. Whatever Victor had been trying to prevent, it had found her anyway. And now they were both in more danger than Elena had ever imagined possible. The warehouse they took her to was exactly what she'd expected from movies. Industrial, abandoned, perfect for the kind of violence that required privacy. They tied her to a chair in the center of an empty floor, the rope biting into her wrists and ankles. Volkov circled her like a predator, his expression calculating. "Victor thought he could lock you away and keep you safe," he said. "Foolish. Nothing is safe from me. Nothing he loves is beyond my reach." "He doesn't love me," Elena lied, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "We have a business arrangement. I'm nothing to him." Volkov laughed. "Is that what you tell yourself? I've had eyes on Victor for weeks. I've seen how he looks at you, how he's changed his patterns to accommodate you. The great Victor Karev, who never let anyone close, who built his empire on isolation, suddenly making himself vulnerable for a woman." He leaned close, his breath sour. "You're everything to him, which makes you the perfect weapon. If you hurt me, he'll destroy you." "Oh, I'm counting on it. Victor angry and reckless is Victor making mistakes, and mistakes will get him killed." Volkov straightened. "He should be receiving my message right about now. A photo of you, tied up and terrified. An address, and a simple choice. Come alone and unarmed, or I start sending you back to him in pieces." Elena's blood ran cold. This was a trap. Victor would come for her, and Volkov would kill him. "He won't come alone," she said desperately. "He's too smart for that. We'll see. I've been studying Victor for years. His one weakness has always been his pride. He thinks he's smarter than everyone, that he can outmaneuver any threat. That arrogance will bring him here." Volkov checked his watch. "And when it does, I'll finally take everything he stole from me. His empire, his life, and the satisfaction of making him watch you die first." He walked away, leaving Elena alone with two guards who watched her with the empty eyes of men who'd committed violence so often it no longer registered as remarkable. Elena tested the ropes, but they were professionally tied. She wasn't getting out of this chair without help. All she could do was wait and pray that Victor was smart enough to see the trap, that he'd bring his entire army, that he wouldn't sacrifice himself in some doomed attempt to save her alone. But even as she thought it, Elena knew the truth. Victor would come for her. He'd promised to come back, and he was a man who kept his word, even if it killed him. Time crawled past. Elena's wrists bled where the ropes cut into skin. Her head throbbed from the earlier blow. She tried to stay calm, to think, to find some way out of this that didn't end with both of them dead. Then she heard it. Gunfire. Distant but getting closer. Shouting in Russian and English. The sounds of a battle moving through the warehouse. Victor had come. The guards near Elena tensed, raising their weapons toward the warehouse entrance. The door exploded inward, and Elena saw Victor moving through the smoke like death incarnate. He had a gun in each hand, and the cold fury on his face was more terrifying than anything Volkov had shown her. The guards opened fire. Victor dropped and rolled, his shots precise and devastating. Both guards went down before they could adjust their aim. Then Victor was running toward her, holstering his weapons and pulling a knife to cut through the ropes. His hands shook as he freed her wrists. Are you hurt? His voice was raw, desperate. I'm okay. Victor, it's a trap. I know. He cut through the ankle ropes and pulled her to her feet, his arms coming around her in a crushing embrace. I know, and I don't care. I wasn't leaving you here. How touching, Volkov's voice echoed through the warehouse. Elena looked up to see him on a catwalk above, flanked by a dozen men with rifles pointed down at them. Right on schedule, Victor, and so predictably heroic. Victor moved to shield Elena with his body, and she felt him tense. Let her go, Alexei. This is between us. Nothing is between just us anymore. You made sure of that when you took everything from me. Now I'm returning the favor. Volkov gestured, and his men took aim. Any last words for your wife before she dies, watching you fail to protect her? Victor's hand found Elena's, squeezing tight. In that moment, Elena saw everything he felt written in his eyes: love, terror, rage, and desperate calculation. Yes, Victor said clearly, I love her, and that's why she's going to live. He moved with inhuman speed, pulling Elena down and to the side as the catwalk exploded in gunfire, not from Volkov's men, but from Victor's team storming in from every entrance. The warehouse erupted into chaos, bullets and bodies and smoke. Victor covered Elena with his body, returning fire with one hand while using the other to drag her behind cover. Elena's ears rang with the sounds of the battle, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might explode. Stay down, Victor ordered, pressing a small handgun into her palm. If anyone gets past me, you shoot them. Understand? Elena nodded, gripping the gun with shaking hands. The firefight seemed to last hours, but probably only took minutes. Victor's team was better trained, better positioned. Volkov's men fell one by one until silence descended, broken only by groaning and the sound of Victor's people securing the warehouse. Above them, Volkov remained on the catwalk, now surrounded by Victor's men. His expression was murderous. It's over, Alexei, Victor called up. Surrender, and I'll make this quick. Over? This is just beginning. You think killing me ends this? There will always be someone else, someone who sees your weakness and exploits it. You've made yourself vulnerable, Victor. That's a death sentence in our world. Maybe, Victor agreed, but I'd rather die vulnerable and human than live forever as a monster who can't feel anything. He raised his gun and fired once. Volkov crumpled, the life leaving his eyes before his body hit the concrete floor. Elena turned away, pressing her face into Victor's shoulder. He held her with one arm while keeping his gun trained on the warehouse, alert for any remaining threats. Clear, someone shouted. Building is secure. Only then did Victor lower his weapon. He pulled Elena fully into his arms, and she felt him shaking against her. I'm sorry, he whispered into her hair. I'm so sorry. I tried to keep you safe, and instead I brought this to your door. If something had happened to you, I'm here. I'm okay. Elena pulled back enough to look at him, seeing the blood on his clothes and praying none of it was his. Are you hurt? Nothing serious. Bruises, maybe a cracked rib. Elena, his voice broke. I meant what I said. I love you, and that terrifies me more than anything else in my life has ever terrified me. I love you too, Elena said, the words simple and true. Even though this is insane, even though your world is violent and dangerous and nothing like what I imagined for my life, I love you anyway. Victor kissed her there in the warehouse, surrounded by bodies and violence and the smoking remains of the battle. It was nothing like their first kiss. This was desperate and claiming and fierce, both of them confirming they were alive, that they'd survived. When they finally pulled apart, Victor's team was watching with carefully neutral expressions. Victor kept one arm around Elena as he addressed them. Clean this up, make sure there are no loose ends, and someone call the estate. Make sure our people there are alive and get them medical attention if needed. Already done, boss, a man Elena recognized from various events said. Estate is secure. Security team was knocked out, but they'll all live. Margaret is coordinating cleanup. Victor nodded. Good. We're going home. He led Elena out of the warehouse to a waiting car, keeping her close the entire time. Elena's legs shook as adrenaline drained from her system, leaving her hollow and exhausted. Victor seemed to sense it. He lifted her into the car, then slid in beside her and pulled her into his lap. Rest, he murmured. You're safe now. I've got you. Elena closed her eyes and let herself lean into him, trusting his strength to hold her up when her own was gone. The drive back to the estate passed in silence. Inside, they found Margaret coordinating with medical personnel and cleanup crews. She took one look at Elena and Victor and visibly softened. "Mr. Karev, Mrs. Karev, I've prepared your suite, sir. Dr. Morrison is waiting to examine you both." "Thank you, Margaret." Victor's voice was rough with exhaustion. He carried Elena up the stairs, to his suite, she realized, not hers. The rooms were similar to hers, but more lived in. Books stacked on bedside tables, papers scattered across a desk. The doctor checked them both over. Elena had rope burns and bruising, a minor concussion from the blow to her head. Victor had the cracked rib he'd suspected, along with various contusions and cuts. Nothing life-threatening for either of them. After the doctor left, they stood in Victor's bedroom, staring at each other across the space that had always separated them. "I want you here," Victor said quietly. "In my space, in my bed, in my life. No more separate wings, no more distance, but only if that's what you want too." Elena crossed to him, taking his hands in hers. "That's what I want. No more running from this. No more pretending it's just a business arrangement." "It hasn't been a business arrangement for months. I just didn't know how to tell you. You're telling me now. That's enough." They showered separately, both too battered and exhausted for anything else, and fell into Victor's massive bed wearing borrowed sleep clothes. Victor pulled Elena against his chest, and she could hear his heart beating strong and steady beneath her ear. "I thought I was going to lose you," Victor said into the darkness. "When I got that photo of you tied to that chair, I've never been that afraid. Not even when my parents died. Because losing you would mean losing the only part of me that's learned how to be human again. You didn't lose me. We survived." Elena pressed a kiss to his chest. "And now we figure out how to live with who we really are. Both of us. I'm going to have nightmares about this. About all the ways I could have failed you. Then I'll be here when you wake up. And you'll do the same for me." She tilted her head back to look at him. "That's what partners do." Victor's smile was small but genuine. "Partners. I like that." They fell asleep tangled together, two damaged people who'd found healing in the last place either expected, in each other's arms, in a marriage that had started as a transaction and transformed into something infinitely more precious. Outside, Los Angeles glittered in the darkness, indifferent to the violence and love and transformation happening in one mansion among millions. Inside, Victor and Elena held each other through the night, their breathing synchronized, their futures no longer separate but intertwined. Whatever came next, they would face it together. That was the promise they made without words, as sleep finally claimed them both. Together. Always. The weeks following that night transformed the estate from a beautiful prison into something that almost resembled a home. Victor began working from the library more often, his presence a steady constant as Elena moved through her days. They fell into rhythms neither had planned, but both welcomed. Morning coffee together before Victor left for the office, dinners that stretched into long conversations, evenings spent reading in companionable silence with their feet tangled on the couch. They were learning each other carefully and deliberately, like archaeologists excavating something precious from layers of protective soil. But Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. Victor was present now, attentive and genuine in ways that made her heart ache. But there remained a careful boundary he wouldn't cross, a line he'd drawn that kept part of himself locked away where she couldn't reach. They'd kissed again, several times, each encounter leaving Elena breathless and wanting more. But Victor always pulled back before things went too far, always retreated to his wing of the house with apologies and explanations about taking things slowly. Elena understood caution, but this felt like something else, like Victor was still protecting himself from something he couldn't name. She was in the greenhouse one afternoon, 6 weeks after their first dinner together, when her phone rang. Her mother's number flashed on the screen. "Hi, Mama." "Mija." Her mother's voice was tight with worry. "Your father. He's in the hospital. Heart attack. You need to come." The phone nearly slipped from Elena's hands. "How bad?" "They're running tests. He's stable now, but... Elena, I'm scared. Can you come? Please?" "I'm on my way." Elena grabbed her keys and ran for her car, not bothering to change out of her soil-stained jeans and old t-shirt. The drive to Cedars-Sinai was a blur of racing thoughts and remembered fragments. Her father's ashen face in his office, the day Victor had offered his terrible bargain, the way he'd aged a decade in the months since, the guilt she'd carried like a stone for not forgiving him, even as she'd sacrificed herself to save him. Her mother waited in the cardiac wing, small and fragile in a plastic chair, her hands twisted together in desperate prayer. Elena pulled her into a fierce embrace, feeling her mother's entire body shake with sobs. "He's going to be okay," Elena murmured, hoping it was true. "He's strong. He'll get through this." The doctor said it was stress, his blood pressure, the anxiety. "Elena, this is my fault. I should have made him see someone, should have insisted he take care of himself." "Mama, stop. This isn't your fault. It's not anyone's fault." Except it was, Elena thought. It was her father's fault for making desperate choices. Victor's fault for forcing impossible decisions. Her fault for holding on to anger instead of forgiveness. Fault was infinite and useless, and her father was lying in a hospital bed regardless of who deserved blame. A doctor emerged, calm and professional, explaining that her father had suffered a moderate heart attack but was responding well to treatment. They'd need to keep him for observation, run more tests, possibly discuss surgical options depending on the results. "Can I see him?" Elena asked. 5 minutes. "He needs rest, but he's been asking for you." Her father looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, connected to monitors that beeped steady reassurance. His eyes were closed, his face pale against white pillows. Elena approached slowly, her throat tight with emotions she'd spent months suppressing. "Papa?" His eyes opened, focusing on her with effort. "Elena, you came." "Of course I came. You're my father." Tears leaked from the corners of his eyes, tracking down his temples. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I did to you, for selling you to save myself. I see your mother crying every night, knowing what we cost you, and I—" His voice broke. "I don't know how to live with what I've done." Elena pulled a chair close and took his hand, feeling the papery fragility of his skin. "Papa, listen to me. What you did was terrible. It was selfish and desperate, and it destroyed the life I'd planned. But I'm still here, I'm still alive, and maybe—" She swallowed hard. "Maybe some good has come from it anyway." "How can you say that? We trapped you in a loveless marriage to a dangerous man." "He's not what we thought," Elena interrupted gently. "Victor is complicated and damaged and sometimes still impossibly distant, but he's not the monster we imagined. And I'm not as trapped as I was. We're figuring something out, him and me. Something real." Her father's eyes searched hers. "Are you happy?" The question struck deep. Was she happy? She thought about morning coffee with Victor, about the way he listened when she talked about her photography, about stolen kisses in the library, and the slow, careful way they were building trust from the ruins of their forced arrangement. "I'm getting there," Elena said honestly. "It's not what I would have chosen, but I'm learning that sometimes the things we don't choose can still become beautiful if we're brave enough to let them." Her father squeezed her hand weakly. "You're stronger than I ever was, braver. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but you have it anyway," Elena said, the words surprising her even as she spoke them. "I forgive you, Papa. Not because you deserve it, but because holding on to anger is too heavy. I'm tired of carrying it." They sat in the beeping quiet, hands clasped, years of hurt beginning to dissolve in the face of mortality's reminder that time was precious and grudges were wasteful. Elena stayed until the nurses insisted her father needed rest. In the waiting room, she called Victor. He answered on the first ring. "Elena, where are you? Margaret said you left hours ago." "My father had a heart attack. I'm at Cedars-Sinai. He's stable, but—" Her voice cracked. "Victor, I need you. Can you come?" "I'm already in the car. 20 minutes." He made it in 15, striding into the cardiac wing still wearing his suit from whatever meeting he'd abandoned, his eyes scanning until they found her. Elena stood on trembling legs, and Victor pulled her into his arms without a word, holding her while she finally let herself fall apart. "I've got you," he murmured into her hair. "I'm here. You're not alone." Elena clung to him, letting his solid presence anchor her while grief and relief and forgiveness all tangled together in her chest. When she could finally breathe again, she pulled back enough to look at him. "Thank you for coming." Where else would I be? Victor's hand cupped her face, his thumb brushing away her tears. Your family is my family now. That's what marriage means, even if we got there backwards. He stayed with her through the evening, through more doctor consultations, and her mother's continued distress. He spoke to specialists with the same commanding presence he brought to business negotiations, asking pointed questions and demanding clear answers. He arranged for her father to be moved to a private room with better monitoring equipment. He took care of things, because that's what Victor did. But more than that, he took care of Elena, checking that she ate, that she stayed hydrated, that she didn't collapse under the weight of worry and exhaustion. Near midnight, with her father sleeping peacefully and her mother finally resting in a recliner beside his bed, Victor drove Elena home. You should have told me about your father's health, he said quietly as they navigated dark streets. If I'd known the stress was affecting him this badly, what would you have done differently? The debt was the debt. We both know you weren't going to forgive it out of kindness. No, but I might have structured the repayment differently, extended the timeline, something that didn't require... He stopped, his jaw tight. I took advantage of your family's desperation. I coerced you into this marriage. Your father's in that hospital bed partially because of choices I made. And choices he made, Elena pointed out. And choices I made. We all own pieces of this, Victor. You can't carry all the blame. Can I? I had the power in that situation. I used it to get what I wanted without considering the human cost. That's on me. Elena studied his profile in the dashboard lights, seeing the guilt carved into the lines of his face. Is that why you won't let yourself be happy? Why you keep part of yourself locked away even now? Because you think you don't deserve it? Victor's hands tightened on the steering wheel. I don't deserve you. I coerced you, manipulated your family's crisis for my own benefit, and then had the audacity to fall for you. What kind of man does that make me? A complicated one. A flawed one. A human one. Elena reached over and covered his hand with hers. You want to know what I think? I think you've spent so long believing you have to be perfect and controlled and invulnerable that you don't know how to accept that you can be messy and still be worthy of love. Elena, I love you, she said simply, the words spilling out before she could stop them. I didn't want to. I fought it for months. But somewhere between the catalog and the ventilation system and you making me dinner and holding me while my father lay in a hospital bed, I fell in love with you. And I think you love me too, but you're too afraid to say it because loving someone means they can hurt you. Victor pulled into the estate's driveway and killed the engine, but he didn't move, just sat there, hands still gripping the wheel, his breathing harsh in the quiet car. I do love you, he finally said, his voice raw. I've loved you since that night at your exhibit when I watched you talk about your work and saw the passion in your eyes and realized I wanted to be someone who made you look that alive. But Elena, I don't know how to do this. How to be someone's husband for real instead of just on paper. How to let someone in without it destroying me when they inevitably leave. What makes you think I'm going to leave? Because everyone does. My parents died. Dmitri died. Everyone I've ever cared about has been taken from me, so I stopped caring. It was safer, simpler. Elena unbuckled her seatbelt and turned to face him fully. Look at me. Victor did, his gray eyes storm dark with emotion. I'm not going anywhere, Elena said fiercely. Not because of some contract, not because I'm trapped, but because I choose you. Every day I choose you. And yes, loving someone is terrifying. Yes, we could hurt each other. Yes, nothing is guaranteed. But Victor, the alternative is living half a life, always protecting yourself, never letting anyone see the real you. And that's not living, that's just surviving. I don't know if I'm strong enough. You are. You're the strongest person I know. You survived losing your parents, built an empire from nothing, learned to navigate a world that would have destroyed most people. You can survive being loved. You can survive loving me back. Victor pulled her across the console and into his lap, his arms wrapping around her with desperate strength. I'm terrified, he admitted, against her neck. The thought of losing you, of something happening to you because of my world, my enemies, it keeps me awake at night. Then we'll be terrified together, and we'll build something strong enough to withstand it. They sat in the dark garage holding each other, both trembling with the enormity of what they were choosing. This wasn't the clean transaction they'd signed up for. This was messy and complicated and real, and it required a kind of courage neither of them had known they possessed. Come with me, Victor said, pulling back to look at her. Not to your suite. To my room. Let me hold you tonight. Let me... He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. Let me show you what I can't find words to say. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. This was the line Victor had been so careful not to cross, the final barrier between their careful rebuilding and complete vulnerability. Yes, she whispered. Victor's rooms were different from hers, darker, more masculine, but warmer than she'd expected. Books everywhere, art that actually meant something instead of being chosen by decorators. His bed was enormous but rumpled, the covers thrown back as if he'd left in a hurry. He'd left in a hurry, Elena realized. He'd dropped everything the moment she called. I've never brought anyone here, Victor said quietly, watching her take in his private space. This is where I come when I need to remember who I am beyond the business and the performance. Thank you for trusting me with it. They came together slowly, carefully, both nervous despite the weeks of building toward this moment. Victor's hand shook as he pulled her sweater over her head. Elena's breath hitched as she unbuttoned his shirt, revealing the scarred landscape of his chest, evidence of a violent past he'd never fully discussed. These, Elena traced a particularly vicious scar along his ribs. Tell me about these. Knife fight when I was 19. Rival gang thought they could intimidate Dmitri by going after me. They were wrong. Elena pressed her lips to the scar, feeling Victor's sharp intake of breath. What else? He told her. Each scar a story, each mark evidence of a life lived on the knife's edge between survival and destruction. Elena listened and touched and kissed each piece of history, learning the map of his body and the weight of his past. When they finally fell into his bed, skin against skin, heat and want and desperate tenderness twining together, it felt like more than physical intimacy. It felt like the final wall crumbling, like two people who'd been performing at being married finally becoming what they'd pretended to be. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Victor's fingers tracing lazy patterns on Elena's bare shoulder, her head on his chest listening to the steady beat of his heart. I need to tell you something, Victor said quietly. About the contract. Elena stiffened. What about it? I had my lawyers draw up dissolution papers 2 weeks ago. The marriage can be annulled anytime you want. Your family's debt remains forgiven regardless. You're not trapped anymore, Elena. You never have to stay out of obligation. Elena pushed up on one elbow to look at him, seeing vulnerability and fear in his eyes. You're giving me an out. I'm giving you a choice. The thing I never gave you before. If you want to leave, you can. If you want to stay, his hand cupped her face. If you want to stay, I need it to be because you choose me, not because you're contractually obligated. You terrified fool, Elena said, her eyes filling with tears. Don't you understand yet? I already chose you, weeks ago, the night you made me dinner and told me you were careful instead of reserved. I chose you then, and I've been choosing you every day since. But if circumstances changed, if you realized you could have the life you planned before all this, the life I planned was small and safe and lonely. This life, this messy, complicated, terrifying life with you, it's bigger than anything I imagined, and I don't want to go back. I want to move forward with you. Victor kissed her then, deep and slow and full of wonder, like she was a miracle he couldn't quite believe in. I love you, he said against her lips. I love you so much it terrifies me. Good. Be terrified. Be vulnerable. Be human. And let me love you anyway. They made love again, slower this time, learning each other with reverent attention. And when Elena finally fell asleep in Victor's arms, in his bed, in his life for real instead of performance, she felt something she'd thought she'd lost forever. She felt free. The sound of shattering glass woke them just before dawn. Victor was out of bed instantly, pulling on pants, his entire body coiled with lethal readiness. Stay here, he commanded, reaching into his nightstand for a gun Elena hadn't known he kept there. Victor, what? Someone's in the house. Stay in this room and lock the door behind me. He was gone before Elena could protest, moving with the dangerous grace of a predator. Elena scrambled for clothes, her heart hammering. She heard voices downstairs, Victor's low and deadly, another voice she didn't recognize, harsh and threatening. Then gunshots. 3 rapid cracks that made Elena's blood run cold. She was halfway to the door when it burst open. A man she'd never seen before, wild-eyed and bleeding from his shoulder, stumbled in. "You're coming with me," he snarled, reaching for her. Elena screamed and grabbed the nearest heavy object, a lamp, swinging it with all her strength. It connected with the man's head, and he went down hard, cursing. Then Victor was there, his gun trained on the intruder, his face a mask of cold fury. "Don't move," he said, his voice glacial. "Security is already calling the police. You move, you die." The man on the floor laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "You think the cops scare me? Mikhail wants what you took from him. He'll keep coming. Your pretty wife won't be safe anywhere." Victor's finger tightened on the trigger, and Elena saw murder in his eyes. "Victor, don't," she said urgently. "He's not worth it. He threatened you. And you already shot him. Let the police handle the rest." Sirens wailed in the distance. Security personnel flooded into the room, securing the intruder with efficient brutality. Police arrived moments later, and the house erupted into controlled chaos. Statements, evidence collection, the removal of the bleeding man who'd broken into their home seeking revenge. Elena learned through fragments of conversation that the intruder had been part of an organization Victor had absorbed years ago, that the man's boss, Mikhail, had been nursing grievances and planning retaliation, that Victor's marriage had made him seem vulnerable for the first time in years, and his enemies had noticed. As dawn broke and the police finally left, Victor stood at the window of his destroyed office, his shoulders rigid with tension. Elena approached carefully, seeing the guilt and fury warring in his expression. "This is what I was afraid of," he said without turning around. "My world touching you, putting you in danger. That man came here to take you, to hurt you to get to me, and he almost succeeded. But he didn't. I'm fine. You protected me. This time. What about next time? What about all the enemies I've made, all the people who'd love to use you against me?" Victor turned to face her, and Elena saw anguish in his eyes. "I can't lose you. I can't live through loving someone and watching them be destroyed because of me." "So what are you saying? That we should end this? That you're going to push me away to keep me safe?" "I'm saying I need to make changes. Real changes. The lawyers have been working on it for months, transitioning my operations fully legitimate. No more gray areas. No more ties to organizations like Mikhail's. It'll take time, but Elena, I can't keep living in a world where loving you puts you in danger." Elena crossed to him, taking his face in her hands. "Then make those changes. Build something new. But don't push me away while you do it. Don't decide for me what risks I'm willing to take. You could have been killed tonight, but I wasn't. And Victor, living without risk means living without love. I'd rather face danger with you than be perfectly safe and alone." "You're sure? Because once we fully commit to this, once I transition everything, there's no going back. You'll be my wife in every way, my partner, my weak spot and my strength." "I'm sure." "Are you?" Victor kissed her hard, desperate, his hands fisting in her hair. "I've never been more sure of anything. I love you, I choose you, and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me back." The months that followed were transformative. Victor systematically dismantled his criminal empire, redirecting resources into legitimate businesses, severing ties with dangerous elements, and making powerful enemies into irrelevant has-beens through a combination of strategic buyouts and carefully applied legal pressure. It wasn't easy or quick, but he approached it with the same ruthless efficiency he brought to everything. Elena was beside him through all of it, learning the intricacies of his business empire, offering insights from her artistic perspective that sometimes saw solutions his calculated mind missed. They became true partners, in business, in life, in the careful reconstruction of Victor's world into something that could sustain love instead of just survival. 6 months after the break-in, Elena realized she was late. She stared at the pregnancy test in her bathroom, watching the second line appear with a mixture of terror and wonder. They'd been careful. They'd talked about children as something distant, theoretical, maybe someday after Victor's transition was complete and their lives were fully stable. But life, Elena had learned, didn't wait for perfect timing. She found Victor in the library, surrounded by contracts for a new philanthropic foundation he was establishing, a way to redirect his wealth toward actually helping people instead of just accumulating power. "We need to talk," she said, her voice shaking. Victor looked up immediately, concern crossing his face. "What's wrong?" Elena sat beside him and placed the test in his hand. I'm pregnant. The color drained from Victor's face. He stared at the test like it was a bomb about to explode. We're... He couldn't seem to finish the sentence. I'm pregnant. I'm scared. I don't know if we're ready. But Victor, Elena's hand went to her stomach, protective and sure. I want this. I want a family with you, if you do. Victor set down the test with trembling hands and pulled her into his lap, his arms wrapping around her with fierce tenderness. I'm terrified, he admitted. I don't know how to be a father. I don't know if I can keep a child safe in my world. Our world, Elena corrected, and our world is changing. You're making it safer every day. We can do this, Victor. Together. He buried his face in her neck, and Elena felt him shaking. A child. Our child. Are you happy? Victor pulled back to look at her, and Elena saw tears tracking down his face, the first time she'd ever seen him cry. I'm fucking terrified and completely overwhelmed and happier than I've ever been in my life. Elena laughed, her own tears spilling over. Then I guess we're doing this. We're doing this, Victor agreed, his hand joining hers over her still flat stomach. All of it. The family, the legitimate life, the future I never thought I deserved. You're giving me everything, Elena. We're giving each other everything. Their daughter was born on a rainy April morning, arriving 3 weeks early and fierce from her first breath. They named her Aria, and she had Victor's gray eyes and Elena's determination. Victor held his daughter with trembling hands, this man who'd faced down killers and built empires, utterly undone by 7 pounds of squalling infant. She's so small, he whispered, awestruck. She's perfect, Elena said from the hospital bed, exhausted and radiant. She's terrifying. What if I drop her? What if I do everything wrong? Then we'll figure it out, together, like everything else. Watching Victor with their daughter became Elena's new favorite subject for photography. She documented everything, his nervous first diaper change, the way he paced the floor at 2 a.m. soothing Aria's colicky screams, the moment she first smiled at him and his entire face transformed with wonder. This man who'd been so afraid to love learned to do it anyway, imperfectly and completely. He made mistakes and apologized for them. He asked for help instead of pretending to have all the answers. He let himself be vulnerable and messy and human. He became, Elena thought, exactly the father Aria needed, and exactly the husband Elena had never dared to dream of. 2 years after Aria's birth, they stood in the grand ballroom of Victor's former estate, now converted into the Karev Foundation headquarters, dedicated to helping families in crisis avoid the kind of desperate choices Elena's father had faced. It was the foundation's official launch, and the space was filled with people who'd once moved through these rooms for very different reasons. This feels right, Elena said, watching donors and recipients mingle, watching hope bloom in spaces that had once held only calculation and performance, taking something built on darkness and transforming it into light. We did that, Victor said, his arm around her waist, Aria asleep on his shoulder. You did that. You saw potential in me when I couldn't see it in myself. We saved each other, Elena corrected. I gave you permission to be human. You gave me a reason to be brave. Victor kissed her temple. Best business transaction I ever made. Elena laughed. We're really bad at business transactions, you know. We were supposed to keep it clean and simple. Nothing about us has ever been clean or simple. No, Elena agreed, looking around at the foundation, at their sleeping daughter, at the life they'd built from the ruins of a forced arrangement. But it's real, and it's ours, and that's better than simple ever could have been. That night, after the guests had gone and Aria was tucked into her crib, Elena and Victor stood in the greenhouse, expanded now to include a children's garden where Aria would someday learn about growth and patience and the quiet resilience of living things. Do you ever regret it? Victor asked. If you could go back, knowing everything that would happen, the fear, the danger, the pain of those first months, would you make the same choice? Elena thought about the woman she'd been standing in her father's office, signing away 2 years of her life with trembling hands. She thought about the hollow months of coexistence, the slow thaw, the terrifying leap into vulnerability. She thought about the life she'd planned, safe, small, controlled, And the life she'd actually built, messy, complicated, bigger than anything she'd imagined. I wouldn't change a single moment, she said. Not the pain, not the fear, not even the loneliness. Because all of it led here. To you, to Arya, to this life we've built. And this is better than anything I could have planned for myself. Victor pulled her close, and they stood among the plants Elena had photographed 1,000 times, documenting beauty in all its forms. But the most beautiful thing Elena had ever captured wasn't in her portfolio. It was the way Victor looked at her now, with complete openness and trust and love. It was the family they'd created from transaction and obligation. It was the proof that broken people could heal if they were brave enough to let someone in. Years later, when Arya asked how Mommy and Daddy fell in love, they would tell her an edited version about a business arrangement that became real, about two people who learned to choose each other. They wouldn't tell her about the debt or the coercion or the months of misery. They wouldn't burden her with the darkness that had brought them together. But they would tell her the truth that mattered, that sometimes love doesn't arrive the way you expect. Sometimes it grows slowly in spaces you thought were too dark for anything beautiful to bloom. Sometimes the life you didn't choose becomes exactly the life you needed. And sometimes, if you're very brave, you can take a transaction built on desperation and transform it into something that looks remarkably like grace. Elena had traded her life in silence, agreed to become invisible to save her family. Instead, she'd found her voice. She'd been seen completely. And she'd built a love story that began with a contract, but ended with a choice that both she and Victor made every single day. Not because they had to, because they wanted to. Because what had started as obligation had become the most honest thing either of them had ever done. And in the end, that made all the difference.